Hi, welcome back to English 111 Online. This week we're going to be looking at creating your full rough draft of your data analysis essay. So you started it last week when you looked at the Global Gender Gap Report, and you looked at each of the 4 categories for the country that you chose, and you wrote some body paragraphs. So what we're going to do is take those body paragraphs now and expand into a complete essay. So this week, view this week's video, which you're doing. Review the assignment sheet for Core Project 3, Data Analysis, because I didn't go over the whole thing with you last week, but I want to particularly point out the points about the introduction and the conclusion. I've also added an outline for Core Project 3 document, so we'll look at that today. And then view the document Key Findings of the Global Gender Gap Report. What that document is really an excerpt from the Global Gender Gap Report, and I thought it might be easier for you if you could just refer to that document instead of having to search for information in the Global Gender Gap Report. Look at your body paragraphs. Make sure each one has a topic sentence followed by evidence from the Gender Gap Report. Make sure you have adequate analysis of the included data in your own words and try to explain the significance of the data. In other words, make your reader understand what all these numbers mean. Add an introduction and a conclusion. Make sure your MLA in-text citations are correct and your works cited page is correct. And then when you have your rough draft put together, go ahead and submit it to Smart Thinking. Provide evidence of your Smart Thinking feedback in the journal for this week. That will be the graded assignment for this week, is your Smart Thinking feedback. And then begin revising your rough draft. The final for this won't be due until next Sunday night, March 31st. So let's take a look at some of these things. Just reviewing the document for the Project 3. Remember, this one is we're back in essay format this time. We did a rhetorical analysis essay. We took a break from essays and did a business letter, and now we're back in essay format. There's only one source for this paper, the Global Gender Gap Report, and I have actually later in the document given you the correct citation for that on your works cited page. 3+ pages this time, because when we did our rhetorical analysis, you only had to have 3 body paragraphs and an introduction and conclusion. And this one has 4 body paragraphs, one for each of those categories that you wrote about last week. And then it has the information with your introduction and your conclusion. You should have 3+ pages without any problem for this one. All right, so we've already done the pre-writing, and you've already turned in your sentences for your paragraphs for each one of those categories. And I had shown you last week how you could use my model paragraphs to look at, to see what I mean, translate the data into text. However, in these paragraphs that I provided as samples, I did not put any kind of analysis or commentary. And so that's probably what you did too. You just wrote out your sentences, and of course we need to go back to the document that you created and add some analysis and commentary to each of those paragraphs. Also, when you're working on your rough draft, as you go, just make sure you have the proper MLA format. your essay should include all of the following paragraphs. Okay, so let's go back here because we're going to add introduction. You can just keep that same document. That's what I had intended for you to do, that you did your paragraphs in last week. All right, so your introduction. Your job in the introduction is to get your reader interested in the topic of gender gap and its importance. And you're going to have to explain a little bit about what the Global Gender Gap Report really is. So your job is to get somebody interested in that. Remember how we get someone interested? What's the first thing that we do? We get a hook. So I have created a separate document here, outline. I'm going to switch over to that one for just a minute. So in your introduction, you're going to start with your hook or your attention getter, as some people call that. So think of something that would make me or any reader interested in reading all of this data on your country's ranking in the Global Gender Gap Report. Try to find an amazing fact, an unexpected fact. For instance, if I were writing about the United States, I was really surprised when I looked at the report last year, and I guess it's the same for this year, although I haven't looked at it for the United States for this year. But I expected that the United States is a pretty progressive country, and I would expect that they would be higher on the ranking of the gender gap report than they are. And so I could start with something like that. The United States is a very progressive country. However, its ranking on the gender gap report puts it about the middle of all the countries covered in the report. And so I don't know that that's amazing, but at least it was unexpected, and it might make me want to read on in the essay to see, well, why is the United States not higher? What is the difference? And so just something to get someone's attention. And I would get it from the Gender Gap Report itself. So I was working with a student on New Zealand recently, and New Zealand has progressed a lot since this report started in 2006, and they've made a big amount of progress in reducing their gender gap, and they rank 7th out of the top 10, or 7th in the global report. So they rank way ahead of the United States. Anyway, once you get my attention, narrow it down. Remember, the introduction paragraph starts with a very general statement. Trying to do my pyramid over here. Starts with a very general, wide statement to get the attention, and narrows down to the bottom of the pyramid, which gives you which is the thesis statement. And so we got to start narrowing it down. So in your introduction, give an explanation of what the Global Gender Gap Report is and why it is important. Why is it important for countries to move closer to parity? Just a moment to talk about this. You need to understand, as well as the people who will be reading your essay need to understand what the Global Gender Gap Report is. Now, the Global Gender Gap Report is talking about how far men and women are apart as far as a gap in these headings that we looked at, whether it's the economic participation and opportunity, whether it's the education, whatever. When we say parity, we think of parity as being together. Male and female are the same. There is no gap when we're at parity. Disparity is when we have a gap. So the women are further behind the men. Or sometimes even the women exceed the men, and when that happens, they go on the other side of the line in the report about your country. So remember, this this whole ranking system has to do with parity. Is the gap this wide? Is it this wide? Is it narrowing over the years? Is it expanding over the years? How close to parity are we? So when we're talking about parity and disparity, or equality and inequality of the sexes, and the Global Gender Gap Report still does a binary gender classification, male and female, and so you need to explain all of this to your reader, because your reader won't know either, because the reader has not read this report, has not talked about, like we talked about in Lean In, the importance of being at parity or at equality for men and women, because it provides a better society, a stronger economy, if everybody has an equal chance and opportunity. Excuse me. So start narrowing it down by explaining what the Gender Gap Report is, why it is important, and why it is important for countries to move closer to parity or equality. So this is where I included this key findings report. So I just copied and pasted this from the actual Global Gender Gap Report, and all this information came from the introductory part. So it's in, the page numbers are in Roman numerals VII 7 and VII 8. And if you use any of this information, then it would be a good idea. Then you would need to, not a good idea, but necessary for you to put those page numbers in there in parentheses. So this has some overall information that you can read through and see if any of it actually applies to something that it applies to the country that you're working on. It explains a lot of information, though, that you could use the wording from if you want to for this. You can read through that and see. Like, for instance, this right here. It says the most gender equal country today is Iceland. It has closed over 85% of its overall gender gap. Iceland is followed by Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And although dominated by Nordic countries, the top 10 also features a Latin American country, Nicaragua, 2 sub-Saharan African countries, Rwanda and Namibia, and a country from East Asia, the Philippines, and then the top 10 is completed by New Zealand and Ireland. So if you happen to be writing about any one of those countries, that would be something that you could put in your report. And if you copy it and paste it exactly, we're going to put it in quotation marks and then put in parentheses at the end of the paragraph the page number that this came from. So I just thought that you might get a better understanding of the report if you read this, and then you also might choose to use this. Like, for instance, you could say that this right here is a pretty good assessment of what it is. Global Gender Gap Index was first introduced by the World Economic Forum in 2006 as a framework for capturing the magnitude of gender-based disparities and tracking their progress over time. And so if you use that, copy and paste that, you put this in quotation marks, and then at the end, remember our quo per punct, you would put quotation marks, parentheses. This would be on page 7, so VII, end parentheses, and then your punctuation period. So you probably don't want to get into this methodology and all of that, but it does give you some ideas that you might use in explaining to your reader what this is all about. Why is it even important? And you're going to continue to narrow it down until you get to mentioning how many countries are included on the report, and then mention your country as one of those. I think it's 149 countries, and yours is one of those 149. Remember, you're not writing about the United States, you're writing about another country. Then you get down to your last sentence in your introductory paragraph, and that's when we have the thesis statement. So I've given you a template to use. Japan has increased its overall gender gap, or maintained its overall gender gap, or decreased its overall gender gap. And I don't know which one of those it would be because I haven't looked at Japan. But choose one of those, and then since 2006, based on, and you're mentioning your 4 categories, you want to mention those, which means, what is the point? Maybe Japan, which means Japan is well on its way to getting the gender gap closer to parity, closer to equality. I expect to see some parity and disparity and equality and inequality because we're talking about that gap. This is equality, this is inequality. This is parity, this is disparity. So you're going to need to use those terms. All right, so that's your introduction. Then here is the way the rest of it will fall out, which is the way that I believe you've already probably set up your document. Economic participation and opportunity, we'll start with a topic sentence. Then you'll give the evidence that you're going to bring from the report written in sentences, and then you're going to give your commentary, and you're going to do that for all 4 categories. So you're down to your 5th paragraph when you finish talking about political empowerment. And it doesn't really matter how you organize these topics as long as it matches the order that you have them in your thesis statement. And you can rearrange that in any order you want as long as you cover all 4, and then make sure the 4 that you write here follow the order from your thesis statement. And then you'll have a conclusion and works cited on a separate page. It also works better if you insert a page break after your last sentence of your conclusion paragraph to get your works cited on a separate page. And then this is the accurate works cited entry, double line spaced, hanging indent, and everything. So if you wanted to just copy and paste that whole this whole entry here, copy it and paste it into your document as your works cited page, that would be correct. Of course, the only thing that would be different is maybe the date that you accessed the Global Gender Gap report. So, and do remember, too, that every time you use information from that report or from this sheet here, the key findings, you need to include page numbers in parentheses at the end of each part of the data that you have used. Okay, so oops, trying to find the cursor thing here. Okay, so this back to the document that tells you what to do. Remember that there's the same thing, template for the thesis statement, the exact same. Your body paragraphs will be organized by category. Each Each category will have its own body paragraph, topic sentence, offer evidence from the report, and analyze, comment, and explain the significance of the data. In other words, what does all this data mean? What does it tell you? Is the country on the right track to decreasing disparity, or in decreasing inequality, or moving closer to parity? So you see what I say, you're going to use these words. Make your own statements about it. What will your reader want to know about what you said in your introduction and your thesis? Keep it centered on what you've told them in the introduction. And of course, this will require you to critically think about how all this data, how important it is, and how you can make that evident to your reader. You've got to keep your reader in mind. You may understand it. You've put it in words. Now explain it to somebody else in your own words here. And then your conclusion, start with a restatement of your thesis, not word for word, but something to bring the reader's attention back to the point of your essay, that your country, Japan, has been steadily moving closer to parity, and then say something about those different categories, mention the points of them. Are they closer, or has the gender gap widened for each of the 4 categories? And then generally broaden it out to end with an interesting point. You might even want to make a suggestion, a suggestion for the country to improve, a prediction of where the country seems to be heading, just something general, but still on the same topic. There's the works cited entry again. You could copy it from there also. And then when you get your rough draft put together, you're going to submit it to Smart Thinking to get feedback, and that's going to count as a course grade. And you're going to complete your final version and upload it on the Turnitin link by Sunday of next week. So we won't be this week. This week, work on your rough draft. Next week, revise and polish it up and come up with your final. So just to remind you, coursework grade for what you did this past week, data to text, Turnitin that you did, and then your submission and feedback from the Smart Thinking will count as a course grade, and your final submission. Of course, this is a big grade, 15% of your grade. So, so you have until March 31st to get your final done, but you have to work on your rough draft this week. The reason I break it up like this is to make it easier for you to accomplish it. All of the things that you need are right here. Here is the graded assignment bar that always alerts you that there's something there for you to do. And here is the submission for the journal that you'll be doing for your grade for this week. And if you have waited until the end of the week to do this, and you don't have time to get your Smart Thinking feedback back, as soon as you get it back, then go back to that tab and post it there. I think I've made that journal available for 2 weeks so that you can, if you haven't gotten your feedback until next week, you can go back and put it in there. But here it is. Submit your rough draft to Smart Thinking, copy and paste your feedback from Smart Thinking into the journal, and then, like you did last time for the rhetorical analysis, add a couple of sentences at the end explaining how you plan to use your feedback to improve your final draft. So that's what we're doing this week. And if you have any questions as you go through this, if you need some help, maybe if you need some one-on-one help with me, we can meet virtually in the Google Hangout, or maybe you can come into the office if you're local and have the time to be able to do that, or maybe you can go into the English studio here on campus, or maybe you can just ask some very specific questions of Smart Thinking. Now remember, when you turn in your rough draft on Smart Thinking, they're going to want to know what your assignment is. So go to your assignment sheet and excuse me, I think these spring pollens are getting me. But up here at the at the very beginning of this document, you can pull information from here for that summary that you're going to give them. You can just say, this is a data analysis essay in MLA 8th edition format. It has to be 3+ pages, excluding my works cited page, and the objective is to do this. And you could just copy and paste that into on the Smart Thinking when it asks for a description. So last time I wrote it out for you, but you're smart. You can use your critical thinking. You can figure this out and just pull from the sheet so that the Smart Thinking tutors will know what it is that you're actually working on. All right, well, good luck on working with this. I know it's going to take a lot of time, and some of you are more familiar with looking at data and making and drawing conclusions than others may be. But this is something that you very likely will have to do in another course in college, and so this is why we require this in English 111. So have a good week. Contact me if you need help. Please don't be frustrated. Just call on me and get my help. And I will talk to you next time.